And hello, everybody. Hello from Barcelona.
And hello from Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure for us to be here. We're really tremendously honored to have been awarded the SEJ Best Paper Award, and would like to begin this seminar by saying thanks to those who nominated us, and that's traditionally the SEJ editorial board members, and also to those who selected us finally for the prize among what probably was a very, very strong field of contenders, and those are the SEJ co-editors. So thank you very much. The key message of this paper is that business model design does not happen in a vacuum. It's very, very important to consider the context. And I think the same is true about the paper and how it came about. It did not happen in a vacuum. So, before anything else, Raphael and I would like to express our sincere gratitude to all of our colleagues who have shared our research interests in the past several decades, and help build this substream of the strategy and entrepreneurship literature, which is now the business model literature. And I just will name a few names of colleagues that we're especially indebted to. And this is Kostas Markidis from London Business School. Rafi, feel free to chime in and add some of yours. Right? But Kathy Eisenhardt and her co-authors from Stanford, Joan and Rick Ricard, my colleague here at the ESE Business School, Ramon Casadesus from Harvard Business School, David Tees from Berkeley, Alfonso Gambardella, Bocconi, Rita Gunther McGrath, Columbia, Anita McGann from University of Toronto, Caroline Frankenberger and her colleagues, Oliver Gassman and colleagues at St. Gallen, and of course our former doctoral students who are now collaborating with us, for example, Julia Snehur, who is in Toulouse, and Henry Han, who's Rafi's doctoral student, who are working on these issues. I think it also a great thanks that I would like to express to the editors who had the courage to publish our papers in the early days when nobody had heard about business models, and when business models was really not an established academic field. And of course, the anonymous reviewers who helped us shape the research and gave us tremendously helpful input. And I would just like to name, in terms of editors, Mike Hitt and Dwayne Ireland, who published in 2001 an SMJ special issue on strategic, which was entitled Strategic Entrepreneurship, Entrepreneurial Strategies for Wealth Creation. And not only did they have the courage to publish our paper on business models, but they also selected it, Rafi, I don't know if you remember, but it was the lead article in this special issue. And that was very, very important, I think, for us, and very meaningful. And I would like to also express our sincere gratitude to late Mike Wright, who was the action editor on the piece that we're discussing today, the 2015 SEJ paper. We owe them greatly. We sincerely appreciate their support and contributions to the research. A big thanks from our part. Okay, so talking about context, this is obviously the big theme of the paper. Context, last 20 years when business model as a topic and business model innovation became important. Let me share the screen with you so that we have prepared a few slides. Rafi, thumbs up if you can see it. Yes. Can we? Good. Okay, excellent. Okay, so here we go. 2001 was a paper the year when we first published our first academic paper on business models in SMJ, in this special issue. And look, this is the list of most valuable companies that year, the 10 most valuable companies by stock market valuation. And you look at this list and you probably think, well, those were the good old days. You have very kind of venerable names in this list, like General Electric leading the list, Walmart, Vodafone, Citigroup, etc., etc. So it looks really very, very solid. But then obviously also remember that the same year NASDAQ crashed in 2001. And you note that on this list, there's no e-commerce company. And in fact, when I remember us presenting our papers, Rafi, at SMS conferences, and when we talked about value creation in e-business, after the NASDAQ crash, people began to question seriously the viability of it, the usefulness of a concept. And so, oftentimes people said, so Amazon, they are probably not going to survive. And obviously we know that that was not the case. Now look at the same list in 2011, and still like 10 years down the road, and still you see this list is pretty much dominated by very traditional companies, oil and gas, finance companies, and it looks relatively conventional. But fast forward to today, this year, 2001, and you see, wow, a big change in that you have companies in there which one would probably refer to, or oftentimes refer to as platform companies, tech companies. Apple leading the pack with Microsoft and Alphabet number 2 and number 3. Amazon already number 5, the company that was decried dead by many in 2001, and Tesla in 6th place. And if you took the same list a few months ago before the Chinese crackdown, it would be even more striking because you would have 2 other companies on that list that are leaders in internet and e-commerce. In China, Tencent, which before the crackdown had a market valuation of 920 billion, and Alibaba, which had one of 804, and these firms nearly half their market value. So, in other words, you look at this list and you see that 8 out of 10, or, now a little less, maybe 7 out of 10 are platform companies, tech companies. Tesla is really not an electric car company. Tesla is a platform on wheels. It has not just an innovative car, but it also has a very innovative business model. And I think that helps it to put it on the map as the number 6 company in the world. Apple, obviously, is also a company that successfully combines product innovation and business model innovation. And there's still other companies that are in the next batch, like ranks 11 through 30 or so. For example, Netflix has a respectable market valuation of 300 billion, which is now more than Walt Disney, that has less than that, 290 billion. And obviously, we know Walt Disney was founded in 1923 and Netflix in 1997. So that's kind of that shows you the speed of change that's going on. Airbnb, a market valuation of $123 billion, 3 times as much as the Hilton hotel chain. So this is how the picture looks in terms of public companies, and of course it's also very interesting, since both Rafi and I are not just strategy but also entrepreneurship scholars. We look at what's next, what's to come, what are the companies that will be tomorrow's kind of stock market winners. And you've probably all heard about this notion of unicorns. A unicorn is a privately held company that is worth more than $1 billion. And so there are obviously lists of unicorns. Right now, we have over 900 unicorns worldwide. And look at the top valued ones. The top valued ones have a very high valuation. For example, ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, is 140 billion, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through that list in like company by company, but some of the names you will know, many of the names you probably will not know, and some of them are what we probably could refer to as tech companies, but many of them are also kind of very interesting, have very interesting business models. For example, the second last on this list is Shein. That's a Chinese company that has no retail outlets, that's just serving customers online. And in 2019, this company had a gross merchandise value of about 2.3 billion. They are expected to have one this year of about 20 billion. And the interesting thing, even though it's a Chinese company, about more than 1/3 of their revenues are coming from the US, I think about 40%, and about 1/3 from Europe. So this is truly a global company. And their idea is social commerce. They have a social commerce business model combining social media with online shopping. Like, the idea of fast fashion a la Zara, but very, very turbocharged and all online. They have about 250 million followers. I mean, that's just 250 million followers on Instagram and TikTok and the like. So what's going on? Answer: the perfect storm. I mean, the perfect storm in terms of technology developments that enable new business models, cloud computing, 3G, 4G, 5G, blockchain, artificial intelligence. All of those are very, very interesting technological developments and technological innovations, but more interesting are the kind of the business model innovations that they give rise to. So let me illustrate what Raphael and I mean by business model innovation, how it differs from classic product and process innovation, with an example from this 2015 paper, this 2015 SEJ paper, and that's a company called Zott. So here's the opportunity that they looked at. This was a bunch of former bankers, online bankers, founders of the first online bank in Great Britain. And they basically got together and said, what's the next thing that we could work on? They got bored a little bit and we're thinking about, is there anywhere a gap in the market that we could address in a new way? And then one of them stepped up and said, look, recently I've been to a bank. I wanted to have a personal loan and I didn't get one. And I didn't get one because the bank considered me unbankable because I don't have a regular paycheck. I do project work. And rather than having a paycheck every month, I have, income like, 1 month and then 3 months down the road and then 5 months down the road. And, I have tremendous trouble getting a personal loan from the bank. So this got them curious. They found out this was actually quite a big market niche in the developed world. And obviously it's also could be interesting in the developing world, but, they were looking at the developed world. And they looked at this and said, wow, in terms of, profit, lenders giving their money to the bank at very low interest rates, and that's probably an exaggeration what we have here. We should probably start by negative. And if you're a borrower, for example, taking out credit card debt, then you have to pay very, very high interest rates. So the transactions cut here is very significant. There could be a very lucrative business opportunity. And they got together and said, so let's think about a new business model to serve this obvious gap in the market, this potential market need. And here is a little video that explains to you a little bit how this model worked.
At Zopa, we match people looking for a great return on their money with sensible people who want to borrow money, cutting out the banks so that both sides get a better deal. It's easy to lend with Zopa. Set up an account, transfer your money, and it is automatically split into small micro loans that are lent to lots of different borrowers, each at a fixed rate. Each month, borrowers make regular repayments of both the loan and interest. These go back into your Zopa account to be lent to new borrowers, which means you're lending out your original amount and the interest you've already earned, so your money grows over time. You can access your money at any time by withdrawing the repayments or by selling your loans in a lump sum to other lenders. We only lend to sensible, credit-worthy borrowers, but if a borrower is unable to meet their repayments, we'll investigate and take the necessary action. In the event that they can't repay the loan, we have a safeguard fund to protect you by covering lender losses. Provided there is enough in the fund, it's not a guarantee, but to date it has paid out all covered loans. We have measures in place to protect lenders, but it's important to recognize that your capital is at risk.
Very true. The capital is always at risk. Also, if you put it into a bank account, there's still a residual risk. Now, what's interesting about this company? Well, if we look at this through our kind of traditional product lens and the kind of the traditional understanding of what financial products look like, in fact, they offer a product like a bank. They offer a loan product to consumers, and that loan product has to be repaid. It's a loan that has to be repaid, a loan on which interest has to be paid in a regular fashion every month. And so as a product, it really does not differ significantly from what any bank would offer. So the interesting thing is then how this kind of product is put together, how it's engineered and how it's brought to the market. And this, what are the activities underlying the entire system here? And this is what Raphael and I refer to as the business model. So there's a couple of novel things here. If you compare that activity system that was just described to you with that of a bank, and the novelty, for example, can be captured along several dimensions. First, among the what dimension, kind of what activities these guys are performing in Zopa, and what things that they're not doing. So they're operating a platform on which issuers and buyers of loans can interact. So they're a platform operator. They don't do retail, so there's no branches. This is a completely online business, so they get rid of those type of activities. What's not been mentioned in the video, but what they also do is that they understand that customers need reassurance. For example, lenders need to know that when they lend their money to individuals they don't know, they need to be assured that these are creditworthy individuals. So credit assessment has to take place, and Zopa offers a tool through which this credit assessment takes place. That's based more, on non-traditional sources of information, not on your regular paycheck, but on social media and things people post, and then it draws a conclusion about, how wealthy they are. So that's kind of novel. The second source of novelty is in the how the activities are linked. In that, here you've got these direct links between buyers and sellers, which in a bank you don't have. What was mentioned in the video was this credit allocation mechanism. So if you lend your money on Zopa, it will not be lent to one person, but it will be split across 50 different individuals to limit the default risk. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, the default risk on that Zopa platform is quite low. A third kind of dimension where we could say, look, there has been some innovation in terms of who's performing the activities, and obviously a very important player is missing from the picture, which is the banks. So banks have been taken out of the picture, and so there's novelty in that sense here. And the last source of novelty in the activity system is kind of the value logic, what we would call the value logic. What's the value logic here? Well, this is a kind of creating a market for people who were previously shut out from the market. And I was talking about freelancers who don't have regular paychecks. And so, through this system, they get the opportunity to receive a personal loan. And then you remember the picture with the different rates and the big gap between the 0 that you get as a lender and the 20% you have to pay as a borrower. Well, that gap is smaller on the Zopa platform because everyone gets better rates. And of course, Zopa also benefits in terms of receiving a part of the value pie. Okay, so again, innovation not in the product. The product is the same old kind of loan as we know it throughout the ages, but in terms of how this loan is engineered, how it is brought to the market, how it is served, that's new, and the newness, the innovativeness can be captured along those dimensions of what, how, who, and why. So this is kind of brings us back to our kind of why we believe kind of our work of the past 20 years, that we believe that the business model is a new perspective on innovation, a new perspective that does not replace our received kind of sources of innovation, received notions of innovation, like product innovation, process innovation, management innovation. No, but it complements those sources. It's a holistic perspective on how firms do business, and the emphasis here is on activities. So we would define a business model as a customer-centered activity system that is enabled by a focal firm, and it's potentially spanning firm and industry boundaries. Those of you who are familiar with our work, this is not coming as a big surprise to you, but I think this is a workable definition. It's a definition with which you can do good research, and it's a definition with which you can also have impact in practice, because that's something that practitioners can also work with. And the interesting thing about business, everybody needs a business model, even those who rely on product and process innovation, because product and process innovation in and of themselves are worthless if you don't have a business model that allows to unlock the value from those innovations. So you need to have a business model, whatever you do. Okay. And the second interesting thing is that the business model itself can serve as a source of innovation to complement these more traditional forms of innovation. And the last point that we've been making is that it's an important, the business model is an important lens on value creation, value capture, and competitive advantage. That is, it's strategically important. That is to say that competition increasingly plays out at the business model level, not just at the product level. So business models are competing against each other, and not just a product of company A competing with product of company B. It's the business model of company A that competes with the business model of company B. So cut a long story short, what this implies is that firms need a business model innovation strategy. this is a new lens, a new layer of strategy that complements received layers such as business strategy or corporate strategy. It does not replace them. It doesn't make them less important, but it kind of complements them. It's a new lens, something that we need to add to our repertoire, that practitioners need to add to their kind of strategy repertoire, and that researchers also need to take into consideration, because it's a distinct new form of strategy, of innovation strategy. And kind of the building blocks of a business model innovation strategy: number one, the design of a new activity system. So we need this activity system focus, this holistic focus. Secondly, we need to take into account the processes and antecedents by which the new system is created. And then thirdly, we need to think about this not just as a one-shot thing, but as an ongoing requirement. So business model strategy also needs to encompass the implementation and ongoing adaptation of the system. And everything needs to be undergirded by the right mindset. And this is kind of where you can find very big stumbling blocks, because if people in organizations, if managers don't have the right mindset, if they still think that the product is kind of the level of analysis in the source of competition that they need to pay attention to, they will not be able to meaningfully innovate their business model. So, a business model mindset is the starting point for every business model innovation endeavor. So what do we mean by kind of, this first part? I'm going to briefly explain to you what the 3 bullet points mean. Design of a new level of a new activity system. So that's kind of the thing. Activity system, we need to characterize it through these 4 dimensions, kind of what activities need to be conducted, who conducts them, how they are linked, and why do they allow for value creation and value capture. Everything needs to be anchored on a very clear customer need. That's number one, point number one, new system of activities. Number 2, we also need to take into account the processes by which these activity systems are created. In COVID times now, of course, this becomes absolutely quintessential, because things are changing even faster than, over the 20 years that I showed to you in the beginning. Customer preferences are rapidly changing. So companies need to adapt very fast and need to have the right processes in place. And so, here's one potential process that it has been inspired by how designers do their work. And that's basically looping through ideation, iteration, and implementation stages, and is going back and forth here. I'm not going to go into the detail of the bullet points, but if you're interested, we have this as part of our new book on business model innovation strategy, where we explain how these kind of rather generic, let's say, processes here really are needed to be adapted and need to be applied at the business model level. And then, coming back to my initial framing, it doesn't take place in a vacuum. The process is not context-free. So in order to kind of make this process a successful process, to make sure that it really does help value creation and value capture for the focal firm, we need to take into consideration that it takes place within a set of antecedents, what we call antecedents or design drivers. And those are the design drivers that we have come up with over the years: needs, goals, incumbents, templates, stakeholder activities, and external environment, deployable resources. And before I go into too much detail here, I probably at this stage I should probably point out that this is exactly what we talked about and what we developed with greater depth in this article for which we are here today, in our 2015 paper in SEJ, and that's the title page from that journal. And before I hand it over to Raphael, I just want to point out this little kind of detail here, that somehow the publisher must have intuitively known that this was a special piece that would receive a prize later, further on down the road, because we were given this creative heading of original article, whatever that means. So I think that was a mistake, but that was a very funny mistake. Rafi, I hand it over to you, and I will mute myself here. But I will operate the slides, okay? For you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And if you can move to the next slide. As Chris has mentioned, the design of a business model is not happening in a vacuum. And it's really important to point out that design of a business model is different in a number of theoretically significant ways from the design of a product. You see, product design centers on a broad relationship between a focal firm that designs the product, and its customers. Whereas the design of a business model includes considerations of multiple stakeholders, such as the suppliers of the firm, the partners of the firm, and of course, the customers. So in other words, when you design the business model, it involves the conceptualization of a boundary-spanning activity system that includes the mechanism by which these various activities are connected to each other, and identification of the parties who are going to carry out each of these activities that are conceptualized in the business model. Product design, on the other hand, is ordinarily centered on identifying a set of interdependent physical components and features that characterize the firm's offering to its clients. So what are relevant features of a product design, such as the technical functionality of the product, the aesthetic appeal of the product, these do not readily apply to business model design. And therefore, the theory that links antecedents and customers of product design do not automatically translate to the design of business models. And so in thinking about this research question of what are these antecedents, we had to go outside the business model literature. We had to go outside the product design literature. And we have developed this acronym called design, which we're going to go through in the context of one example. Next slide, please. So with respect to the methods used in developing the theory, which is really a deductive theory that is anchored in the design literature, and in particular based on a seminal paper by Boland and Colopi in 2004. And we had to rely on these other sources of knowledge for inspiration because we believe that, as I just pointed out, that the design of business model is really different than the design of a product. So in developing our kind of conceptual theory, we did rely on a number of papers which we quote, but the main kind of concept that we anchored our theory on is based on the paper by Boland and Colopi. So in that paper, they have identified 41 design concepts that are relevant to management. And what we, in our analysis of these, and we go through these in some detail in the paper, we distinguish between 12 antecedents, 8 consequences, and 21 process-related concepts that they include. And we use them in 4 factors or buckets. And in order to we use some data as an illustration, and specifically we conducted 27 interviews with co-founders and senior executives of 9 person-to-person ventures in 5 different countries, right? So here is a snapshot, if you will, of some of the companies. We had to keep the names confidential, so we used the these name generic alphabet names for the various companies, and you can see the type of data that we have. When were these companies founded? Who did we interview? What were the specific dates of the interview? How long the interview was? So there's a fair amount of data, and we try to look at different business models that, broadly speaking, are in the same space. Next, Christoph.
Yeah, Rafi, before we go to the next, I would just, I'm thinking that I think today we would use different names for our companies, right?
Right, because of right.
We would not call them alphabet.
We did not anticipate COVID.
No, we
That's
didn't.
true.
So that's something we couldn't anticipate, but you know,
Okay.
sad story. Okay.
Okay, so next slide.
Yep.
So just to use, I thought, one example, goals to create and capture value. So the theoretical argument, we bundled a number of concepts that are highlighted by Boland and Colopi, goals, client, agonize, balance, and tension, and we bundled them into this antecedent called goals to create and capture value. And there is some tension here, and I'll talk for a second about the tension. If you just think about, in creating the business model as a focal firm, you just think about the total value creation, the economic viability of such a business model might be at risk. If you just think about, on the other hand, of value capture, you might not be able to capture all the value that the business model has the potential to create. So you need to ensure incentive compatibility, and that's the main issue. There has to be enough for each of the partners in the business model to want to collaborate and see that there is enough in it for them. In other words, that value capture is not just by the focal firm that designed the business model, but by each and every one of the partners, including the customers that have to capture some value for this, of course, otherwise they wouldn't buy. But each of the partners has to have enough ability to capture some of the value, and that's a fine line of how does one maintain this incentive compatibility, that all the partners in the business model have an incentive to collaborate in order to create the value and be able to capture some of that as well. And that's kind of the lock-in idea that lies behind it. Next. So our first proposition that resulted from this, so these theoretical arguments that we elaborate on in the paper, read that focusing on the goals to create and capture value antecedent by balancing value creation for all business model stakeholders with value appropriation by the focal firm, and B, responding to the needs of business model stakeholders, especially customers, in a customized fashion. Enhances both value creation through lock-in and therefore enables a stable business model that is also scalable as long as this incentive compatibility is maintained. Next. So what we, go ahead. What I thought, we'll give you a couple of examples of quotes from our interviews. And here you see a CEO of company Beta that sees himself in this particular case as really the architect, the designer of a business. He happens to be a designer. And the other issue that comes across here from this quote is the need for fairness, right? So that providing access to other people. And then the next quote, if you read it, I won't go through this. If you can bring up the next quote, Chris. The next quote really of company Kappa really highlights that you need to be sensitive to all the partners, and there has to be proper incentives for all the partners to participate in the business model. So you can see that through these interviews, which we use as an illustration, we got important ideas that enter into the theory that we developed to anchor our design antecedents. So what we thought might make sense is to look at an application of these antecedents to a case. So Rent a Runway, as many of you may know, went public in late October. They went public at a share price of $21 a share, at the valuation of $1.4 billion. I checked today. Today they're trading below the IPO price at $12 a share. The market cap of only about $780 million. But they solved a big problem. What was the problem that Rent a Runway solved? That young professional women wanted access to designer clothes. Designers of these clothes, such as Chanel, Dior, Gucci, they wanted access to these professionals, but who could not afford these designer dresses, right? So they enter Rent a Runway that said, well, you know, you could actually create that by allowing these professionals to rent those designer clothes for 10% of the price. So before we go into the business model, let's hear a little bit from these two co-founders.
I'm Jen, and this is Jenny, and we're the co-founders of RentTheRunway.com.
Ever wish you could wear a designer dress right off the runway or the red carpet? Well, now you can.
Rent the Runway is an amazing service that rents designer dresses and accessories to women for 10% of the retail price. How it works is you go to the site, you find a dress and accessory you love, we ship it to you in two sizes to ensure the perfect fit, because no one knows if they're a 2 or a 4. And then we send you a pre-stamped return envelope just like Netflix.
We take care of the dry cleaning, so it couldn't be easier. We have over 170 designers here, over 40,000 dresses. We are every woman's dream closet right here in the Rent the Runway warehouse.
Because you work directly with the designers on this.
That's right. We work directly with the designers and make all of our purchases during Fashion Week and have all the latest trends.
We're kind of like a gateway drug of designer fashion. Right. Because once you put on a great dress, you want to wear it forever. I know a lot of women just want the convenience of being able to call someone and ask those questions you might be too intimidated to ask. Right. So you call us, and those stylists will tell you how to accessorize it to fit your body type and your style.
We want you to be worry-free when you rent the runway, so we include insurance with every rental.
It's a Dolce & Gabbana dress that retails for $1,400 that you can rent for just $200. You can also rent all the accessories. Actually, these accessories together rent for just $35.
I mean, one-stop shopping.
So go to the next one, Chris. So obviously, these co-founders, when they started the business, had to figure out how to do this, how to design the business model. They had some initial ideas, but as they did more of kind of market discovery and customer discovery, they refined their ideas. So let's see. Let's start with the first goal. The goal was to create a feasible, a viable, robust, and scalable business model, right? That allows women to rent these designer dresses, but obviously it has to be incentive compatible. The designers have to be interested in it, and the women have to be able to buy it. So initially, Jen met with one of the designers. The acronym is Diane von Fonsensberg, and she's the lead designer, and she told her what she wants to do. And of course, she said, no, you're cannibalizing my business. Why would I want to rent it out? I want to sell it. so because the initial idea was that the designers will have the website and the designers will stock the merchandise and operate the website. And the only thing that RTR will do is they will do the logistics. They will wash it, they will package it, but it will all be done by the designers. But so the more they did customer interviews or discovery interviews, both on campus trunk shows, they did some other experiments with potential customers and with about 30 different designers, they slowly figured out what are the pain points for each of these stakeholders, and that gave them the idea of how to begin to design the business model. Let's go to the next one, Chris. The next one is, well, you needed capital for that, and they had a capital partner with Bain Capital. Obviously, they hired the employees. They needed to use FedEx or UPS to ship it, and these were very valuable resources that they had outside the company. Next. External environment, they were, it's a growing market, right? And they didn't anticipate COVID. COVID didn't help this company, there's no doubt. But there's a growing market there of young professional women who have a limited financial capacity. And that was basically the premise that started the idea of make those expensive dresses available to these women. Let's talk about these other two, Christoph, real quick. So the stakeholders are, of course, the fashion designers, jewelry designers, shippers like UPS and FedEx, and obviously key employees. And they basically developed a business model that is very similar to a car rental company, right? Or party rental company. And because the name of the game is asset turnover. The inventory is worth a lot of money. They buy the inventory wholesale, not retail, but then they rent it out at 10% of retail price. And they have some costs associated with running this operation. They ship it out, they have to, when it comes back, they have to check it for any damage, they have to dry clean it, they have to ship it out. So the faster they turn these dresses over, the more money they're going to make. So these antecedents provided the framework within which the two co-founders of Rent a Runway were able to craft the business model. Go to the next slide, please. Using our what, how, who, and why framework, they were able to build on these antecedents and figure out exactly what they are going to do and what other parties are going to do. And they did that in a way that is incentive compatible and created strong loyalty for both designers and young women who were, there were emotional aspects associated with wearing these designer clothes. So the main idea here is that it is the analysis of these antecedents that led to this robust business model that created a company that was worth more than $1 billion, not that many years after it was founded. And with that, Chris, I'm going to turn it over back to you. You're muted. You're muted.
I know, classic mistake. I mean, how can that happen to me like 1.5 years after we've learned all how to Zoom, but it still happens. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I was saying that this, given the time, we were now 45 minutes into the session and we still have like 15 minutes to go, but I think we want to leave the 15 minutes for Q&A because I've seen some questions, some interesting questions in the chat. And so let this be our last slide. Let us just kind of say that, much of what we talked about is now captured in this book. Our 2015 award-winning paper is also went into this book in terms of the antecedents, as Rafi just explained to them. And the book is composed of like three parts. Part one is about the foundation, like the mindset. This reflects our first aspect of business model innovation strategy. The first bullet point, if you remember that, which is kind of a framework, like what is the, you design of a new activity system. And here is explained in the first kind of part, what is this new activity system? How should we think about it? And then part two is about the process, how to design a new activity system. And part three is about making it happen and ongoing adaptation. And the last chapter is the need to have a business model innovation strategy. So, the big kind of takeaway is that we need to kind of really add this to our strategy toolkit. We need to think about business models and business model innovation strategically, and not just as a one-shot thing, but as an ongoing requirement. And for that, everybody kind of in the organization needs to be prepared. They need to be educated. They need to be upskilled, and they need to be ready. So let me stop the sharing here and move to the kind of to questions. And I do encourage, and we do encourage you to submit further questions in the chat. So I read this maybe first question, or should we ask Emily to post the question?
Yeah.
No, Ryan.
Yeah, Emily. I'm gonna push the talk button. Hopefully you
Sure.
have your microphone ready. If you go ahead and ask your questions. We cannot hear you, Emily.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you again for presenting. I was just curious, I know the paper really focuses on startups and new ventures. How applicable do you see these findings to established firms as, business model innovation in terms of the established firms?
Yeah. Should I take this first, Rafi?
Sure. I mean, go ahead.
And I'm sure we have complementary answers.
Right.
So, Emily, thank you very much. Very nice question. How applicable is this all to established firms? So, in terms of the paper, in the paper, our theory development is agnostic of whether it's a startup or an established firm. So we draw, as Rafi explained, we draw on design concepts, design theory, and of course, much design takes place in established firms. So we use the data from those peer-to-peer lending startups as illustration only, okay, as illustration. So it comes after the propositions. But that is to say that we believe, in terms of the theory developed in the paper, it's highly relevant for established firms. And I can tell you that from, firsthand with, experience in terms of applying this framework to established firms. All of this applies, and all of this is highly relevant. For example, the first thing that Rafi talked about, this goals antecedent, the needs antecedent. I mean, this is so important for startups. It's almost like a super intuitive thing. You have to look at what the market needs. Although maybe some entrepreneurs still think product first. But if you go into large companies, established companies, to tell them that they really need to listen very, very carefully to the customer, even though it's a mantra in these companies often, what they do is another thing. And they have to painfully learn what customer discovery really means. So yes, I do think this is highly applicable, Rafi.
So I just want to say, in chapter 10 of the book that Chris and I co-authored, we talk specifically about implementing new innovative business model in established firms, and we highlight some of the barriers that established firms face for implementation. There is both, direct or explicit resistance to change. That's very normal. People, hooked up to the processes and the way they do business, they have a very hard time changing. They may be afraid that it affects their career in some way. But there's also tacit resistance resulting from inertia, right? So we go through all these challenges, and then we offer specific solutions for how do you overcome these various barriers that established firms face to the implementation of novel business models that, perhaps complement the current business model. So for example, take Walmart. Walmart, is the largest retailer in the world, has all these stores around the world, and they developed a business model for online, which complements the offline. In fact, it's used as a strategic example, a strategic advantage for a company like Walmart to have an offline presence and an online presence. Interestingly enough, Amazon that started online is now going offline, right? So there are complementarity. By the way, there are also barriers for startup firms that need to overcome. I'll give you one example. Many startup firms that develop a novel business model depend on many, many external partners. They're hard to govern. How do you overcome that? So I'm just giving you quick examples, to highlight that business model innovation is crucially important to established firms because they may be put out of business by innovators. And we know there are many examples that, for example, Blockbuster was put out of business by who, right? So, the point is that it's strategically important for established firms. It's doable. They have barriers, and we offer specific ways to overcome these barriers. And I'll give you an example of novel business model in a Swiss company called Nestle, right? They developed Nespresso, which is a very different business model than the Nescafe business model. So we went around the world and worked with both established and startup firms to test our concepts. And I can tell you that once executive mindset embraces business model, which is a holistic way of thinking, business model innovation, it really settles into the entire organization. It does require leadership.
Okay, Ryan, maybe next question. Ryan?
Yes, let's go to Swapan Ghosh. I'm going to push the talk button. Hopefully you have your microphone handy. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi, my name is Swapan Ghosh. Yeah, so I am reading your book, Business Model Innovation Strategy, and I like your what, how, who, and why framework. So I actually, my previous employer is General Electric, year 2001, that was the highest market cap. So I have a, little bit of, not able to understand how to apply business model innovation for, non-digital companies or industrial, companies, because most of the business model innovation, if you look for the digital products or digital companies, we can understand that, but how it can be applied for industrial companies just to change their business. And that's why you might have seen that now the new conglomerates have generated, and all the conglomerates are going in a different directions.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much, Swapan, for your question. And first of all, thank you very much for finding the book interesting. That also is very nice to hear. You have a point in that, ton of these traditional, what we could still probably today call non-digital, but in 5 years we will not have any non-digital firms anymore. But maybe today still more traditional firms are probably struggling with this. But we do see increased efforts across the globe in all industries with all sorts of firms. And I'll just give you one example. This is a German company, a company called Bosch, that is known for its automotive parts, tier 1 supplier, and then also for household appliances. A company that spends about 7 billion in euros about $8 billion probably in R&D every year. So this is a massive investment in product innovation. But their CEO and their leadership team has recognized the importance of business model innovation. So they have started a very, very important internal initiative and accelerator program where they push like hundreds of teams through the program to come up with new business model innovation initiatives. This is not to say that it's easy. It's certainly not. And for the reasons that Rafi outlined, that I also described in our book, there's a lot of resistance in those companies, and we need a lot of internal entrepreneurship, if you wish, to make this happen. But it is happening, and there's more and more examples of companies that are now embracing this new type of thinking and that are putting these initiatives in place. In fact, I'm doing a research project with my colleague Caroline Frankenberger at the University of St. Gallen, and we have a very nice data set of a large number of companies in the German-speaking countries, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, that have engaged in business model innovation initiatives. So, while it's difficult for them for many reasons, deployed assets, mindset issues, cultural issues, it's not impossible, and it is happening. Rafi, do you want to add to that?
Oh, I think you answered it correctly. Maybe we have time for one more question, Chris. We have 2 more minutes. So.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Ryan, you pick.
All right, let's go to Stefan. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Stefan von Delft. If you have a microphone, please go ahead and speak.
Yeah, thanks very much. I suppose you mentioned that it's not only important to have a business model that is feasible, but also one that is scalable.
Yeah.
But there is probably a difference between a scalable business model and to scale a business model. So a digital venture, in theory, can scale pretty fast, but then in practice, how do you successfully scale the business model? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's a very good research topic, by the way, as well. And it's something that, it's not just relevant for the startup world, but I think this can be now linked very nicely with Swapan's question about, business model innovation in large companies. Because for large companies, it really only makes sense if they can create something, a meaningful business from, an innovation initiative. Not just, a few $1 million revenues, but maybe hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So for them, scaling is absolutely of the essence. And I think we should probably learn and know more about this subject. I know of a current very exciting research project that Kathy Eisenhardt and I think one of her doctoral students are pursuing at Stanford, where they look at exactly this aspect of how to scale the business model, and they look at the process and they delineate process elements such as timing in the process. When is the right time to pause in order to test out certain elements in the activity system to make sure that they're truly scalable? Because as you have pointed out, Stefan, scaling an activity system as opposed to scaling a product, a digital product, is much more complicated, much more complex, and requires much more thinking. And it's best to do this already in the development stage. But there's exciting work going on in this domain, but I think there's still a lot of exciting work to be done.
Okay, thanks.
I think we should thank everybody for tuning in to today's talk, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue. I think Stefan identified an area that is being developed right now, but we don't know a whole lot on it. And there are lots of, in a book that is forthcoming, we have a paper that identified a number of research questions that are open-ended with respect to business models. And I think Stefan identified one area which is profoundly important because the resilience, it's not just the scalability, the resilience of the and robustness of the business model. These are important dimensions, and we don't know a whole lot about them. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for me as well. And just one more kind of thought, maybe my last thought, my key message here is think about our storm picture. So I think we're in the middle of a business model revolution, not in the middle of a tech revolution, but in the middle of a business model in a revolution that's enabled by new technologies. And I think that for me is the key takeaway of all of our work over the past few decades, Rafi. And there's exciting work to be done. And I'm looking forward to doing more and to learning more about, all of, the participants' research. Thank you very much for tuning in. Back to you, Ryan. Yes,
thank you so much. Thank you both to both of our hosts. An excellent paper presentation. Just wanted to remind everybody, if you missed some portion of this, we invite you to check out the recording, which will be hopefully up later today. And hopefully continue the dialogue on there. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.